All right, welcome back. We are WEBD6201. That's client-side scripting in the winter 2022 semester at Durham, and it's week 13. Wow, can't believe we got here again. And we only have one part of this week because of the Easter weekend, long weekend coming up. So we're only going to do one part, this part. So we're sitting at week 13, and we're talking about authentication with JWT. There are some parts that I'm going to move over to next week, only because from a timing perspective, it just worked out better that way this time around. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be doing. So last week, what we talked about was authentication with Passport and Mongoose. We restructured our application client server. We changed some parts of the MVC structure. We added some stuff. We didn't have a controller piece. The controller piece was the last piece that was missing, this piece right here. And we're going to add that in this week. We updated TypeScript default exports. We did that as well. We also updated our login, register, and header views. We added EJS to all those things. We wired up registration, login, logout functionality. We did all that on the router side. We created an AuthGuard function. We actually created a utility file that had AuthGuard and this other thing, which was very cool, a display name function that allowed us to inject the display name properly. This week what we're doing is we're going to be talking about what JWT is. We're going to talk about security considerations as well as authentication with JWT. The stuff that we're going to do in our in-class exercise today is going to be the following. We're going to update our header components to show active links. We're going to separate, create separate routers for index, auth, and contact list. We're going to separate our controllers from the routers, and inside that folder we'll have separate files. That's what we're going to have. And then we're going to configure JWT, but we're not actually going to see it in use until next week. In-class exercise 13 is due this Saturday, and lab 4, as a reminder, is due next week. So this week is not as a heavy week as other weeks that we've had this semester. Okay. Stuff that's left over from this week that we're going to pass into next week are building an API server. We're going to do that next week. Implementing new API endpoints and making calls to the API server. We're going to do all that next week so that we don't have to do it this week. And the reason why we're doing that is because it's a short week and we have a lot of stuff to do and not a lot of time to do it. So let's get moving on this part. So what is JWT? Because the topic of this week is JWT. What is it? Well, let's get into it. So JWT stands for JSON Web Token, or Jwt. Some people say Jwt for short. And what it is it's a standard, like it says, for safely passing claims from one system to another. And it's required if we're going to create an API. And I kind of drew a very simple diagram last time, and I'll kind of redraw it this time for you guys so you kind of have the same experience as everyone else. Let's suppose you have a server, or a user. So the user is way over here. And the user makes a request. Usually what we have right now is we have a backend server, which is we have a backend server, which is our, I'm sorry, I'm just drawing this out, so 1 second. Our backend server is Express, and it's probably sitting over here right now. Okay, so here's Express, and we'll just label this as a backend server. And the backend server, right, what it does is it has links to the database, right? So that's how it works. So right now, the database might be connected to it. Let's see if I can make this so that it kind of looks like a database. And it probably won't because, I'm using primitive drawing tools here. But this database, which it looks like a barrel in our case, but is where we have our data store. So this is our data store, database. The database itself has all the information for logging in, logging out at this point, all that stuff. So typically what happens is the user makes a request. Let's make that request red. The user makes a request and it hits our backend. Our backend then processes the request. It uses the model, whatever the user is trying to get at. Maybe it has to log in the user. So it goes to the user model. It confirms that the user's logged in, returns the information back to the backend, right? And then the user might make another request, right? So the user's taken, some information from the server, in our case, and then they make another request to the server after they've logged in, and the server goes out back to the database, retrieves some data from the database, and we return stuff back to the user. And in so doing, we have a couple of round trips that happen, okay? But here, our backend database, our backend server right now in Express is being used as both a backend and a front end because we're using EJS views. We're using an EJS view template engine in order for us to generate views and return it to the user. And so all the authentication, everything is happening on one system. Okay. But what if we inject something in between? So, which is what we're thinking about doing next week, right? Next week is our week where we're going to actually have a separate system, and that separate system is going to be the front end, all right? And the front end could be anything you want, from your own homegrown single page application to Angular, React, Vue, whatever you have, whatever latest framework you have. So now what's going to happen is the request is going to look something like this. The user is going to connect with the front end. The front end is going to send a request to the back end to log in. The back end is going to grab stuff from the database or connect with the database and make sure that the information that the user is sending, that the front end worked out, is good. And once the front end is logged in and we're good to go, then the user is going to be redirected from here. So the front end responds, right? And then the user makes another request, let's say to go to the contact list. Then we have to make another request to the back end. The back end goes to the database. And then from here, what happens is it goes kind of something like this. Okay. So there's another area here with more connections. But what's happening is, and this is different, is the front end and the back end are separate systems. And so what's happening is the user is not directly logging into the back end. It's actually connecting with a front end set of views that's a separate system. This front end could be sitting on another computer. It could be in another country for all you know. It could be a separate module, right? Or component, a separate service even, right? So what we need to do is connect with the backend securely. And you can't do that with sessions, because basically what's happening is you're using a session object, and the session object is something that is happening here. But what the backend returns to the front end, right, is usually, it's not a view anymore, right? What the backend returns to the front end is something like an API data, right, which is usually in JSON format. Okay, that's what it returns. So that's what it's returning back out. When you're actually getting data, you're hitting an application programming interface and it's returning JSON back out. Okay, whereas the front end returns actual views back out to the front end. The views are not happening on the back end anymore. All the back end is doing is returning some kind of data that the front end can consume. But the problem is that how do I connect to the back end so that the back end knows that the front end is, well, who they say they are? And that's the issue, right? We need some kind of way of identifying that the front end is who they say they are, and it's not some other malicious user or bad actor, okay? Otherwise, there could be some kind of security issue. All right, so how do we go about that then? We use Jwt for this. And what happens is Jwt is made up of a couple of components. One of them is it creates a claim, and each claim itself, if you will, or each Jwt or JSON Web Token has a few different parts to it or components. One of them is a header. Another one is, the payload. And a third part is the signature. And what we want to do is we want to use a signature to verify that the token that we've sent to the server is valid. Because what if there's a malicious user that gets in between the back end and the front end, somehow intercepts the data, right, and tries to use that data for whatever their purposes are. Maybe to expose people on the internet or do whatever they're going to do. Use that data. Maybe it's credit card information or something else. We don't want that to happen. JWTs look like this. They look kind of encrypted. And there's, again, notice that there are these little dots here. These little dots are separators between the header, the payload, and the signature. And all of these things are the things that are going to be verified from the front end to the back end. So again, so there are definitions of some kind of object. Usually the subject has the payload. What happens is we use JWTs to transfer claims between two parties, usually two systems, right? That's how it works. And typically what we use them for is for login systems, although other uses are possible, things like authorization and federated identity and a bunch of other stuff that we can use as well, stateless sessions. And JWT was created way back in 2011. Well, that's when the encryption group was something that they were thinking about doing. By 2013, they had written, a series of drafts, and after that point, Jwt was born. What it allows us to do is we have the ability for us to have, all client side is all stateless. So if you kind of make a request to get an HTML document from a server, if the user is doing that, they send a request to the server. It just sits there. The server maybe does some processing, goes to the database maybe, and then when it's finished, it sends information back to the client. But there's no state. State isn't being maintained, right, by the client itself. All the state is happening is on the server side. The server side is maintaining state. Is my client logged in? Do I have they made a proper request? All that stuff is on the server side, but the client side is stateless. And as a result, because the client side is stateless, then it is subject to tampering. Because between the client and the server, I can insert myself as a malicious user or a bad actor and kind of try to act as if I'm the front end server. And if I do that, I can get access to information that I don't want. So in order for us to do that, we need to protect the identity of the user who logs in so that it doesn't get intercepted by a bad actor and so that they won't be able to use that information to log into the back end. So most sessions are signed, and what we want to do is we want to pass around a ID or email from the user to the front end server, from the front end server to the back end server, and without having any kind of risk that the user's information is going to be kind of intercepted or something bad's going to happen to them. And that's what we want to try and avoid. So notice that there's a malicious user here, and what they want to try and do is they want to insert themselves between the user and the server. And if this happens, then what ends up happening is it creates almost like this vulnerability. So here are some security considerations we can talk about. One of them is called signature stripping. What if you have a JWT we've signed it, but maybe the server that's receiving it isn't configured correctly. What can happen is that a malicious user can intercept the entire JWT, modify it. Notice that the header is the same, right? But the payload is different. The payload is different, okay? And the signature is missing. We don't have a signature here at all. And what happens is, what I do is I return the information back, to the server, and where the subject had a user ID of whatever that user ID was, and a role, if we're using role-based authentication as admin, the malicious user can switch things around and then return back a role of root, let's say, which is giving them system access to the server. We don't want that to happen, and if the server is badly configured, this is definitely a vulnerability. So signature stripping is something that can happen with tokens, but I mean, you need first of all, a very knowledgeable user, someone who has had access to the server already, understanding what they're using on the back end. There's a lot of information that they need. But is it possible? Yes, it is. And so this is one of the attacks we have to think about when we're using JWTs. And the other one is, there's two more. There's cross-site request forgery, or CSRF. And this is where a user is logged in by tricking the user's browser into sending a request from a different site. So this is interesting. So I'm going to go to another site, and that site is going to send the request to the server. And then what I can do is I can use information as an example to log in to the server with some very simple ways of doing it. Take a look at this. A common example is an image tag embedded in a malicious page with the source pointing to the attack's target, right? And that target site is something that I can use. I can use an image tag for that. That basically allows me to add a user where the username is name, and we can grant admin access. This kind of idea. That is very simple. So someone actually, when the image is kind of up, it'll actually point to, that site. It's very simple to set up, and it creates an issue, a security concern. I'm not going to go into too much of this because we're going to run out of time today, but pretty much that's one of the considerations. The other one is cross-site scripting, where attacks attempt to inject JavaScript in trusted sites. And if an access token is leaked before it expires, a malicious user could use it to access protected resources, because now they have the signature, they have information, and they can use it to validate themselves, even though it's improper. So this is another type of attack, very similar to SQL injection. So there's a couple of concerns, and it talks about how this kind of stuff happens. And cross-site scripting is something that can be avoided, by using JWT. So it's pretty cool. So what is JWT? How is it made? It's made with three parts, like we said: a header, a payload, and a signature. And the first two elements are JSON objects, and the third element is dependent on the algorithm used for signing or encryption. And so the algorithm could be like a hash, where you have salt and pepper to create the algorithm, and it looks like you need to know what that is for them to create that that encrypted value. And the header really carries some information about itself, like who am I, what kind of request am I making, and so on. The payload is user data. It usually includes things like username and email address or other information to log the user in. And what happens is that we want to log in, and we're going to be using Passport with Node.js just like now. But Passport, what happens is currently it stores a session object, And we don't really need a session object, as an example, when we're dealing with two systems. If one system, the back end, is communicating with the front end, right, we're not using sessions. There's no session that's being created, right? It's stateless. So because there's no session that's being kept up, you need to be passing along tokens from one system to the other. And so sessions won't be an issue once we move away from a Express server with an EJS front end, right? You won't need that. You'll be using tokens only, right? So that's something that you need to know. So again, Passport allows an option to store the user object in the request object instead of the session object. And we're still going to be using username and password like we've done before. But here's how everything is going to work, you know, kind of going forward. When the user logs in, the backend creates a signed token, right, and returns it in the response. And then the client saves the token locally, typically in local storage or somewhere else, and sends it back in every subsequent request that needs authentication. So it's going to say, every time I want to do anything in a secure area, I'm sending that information back to the backend. All requests needed authentication pass through a middleware function that checks the provided token and allows the request only if the token is verified. So that's what happens. So even if my token changes from, and if it's any different than it was the first time I logged in, so somehow I've modified that token, tried to give myself extra access or whatever I'm trying to do as a malicious user, I'll be logged out because it doesn't match the original token that I got in the first place. All right, let's get to it. We're going to do the installation piece now, and I think there's a lot to do today, so I don't want to go too much more than what we've done already. So just like before, I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code. This is the stuff that I did from the last class. I'm just going to bring in section 3 here, which is you guys. And I'm going to create a new folder here called ICE13. And I'm going to copy everything from ICE12, not including the node modules folder. So I'm going to copy them. And I'm going to go into ICE13 and we're going to paste it in ICE13. I'm going to take ICE13 and drag and drop it in. And what I can do here is I can do a yarn install. Now yarn install is good because it's going to give me everything back, but it's also bad because it's going to break some of the changes we made last day with our one of our type definition libraries. Here, what I want to do is I want to add in those new modules. So I'm going to say yarn add, and we're going to add 3 pieces to it. So one of them is going to be cores. We want to add cross-origin resource sharing. Cross-origin resource sharing is required because if I want to host both the server and the client, which might be something we do next week, if we want to have both of those things on the same box, so the same server. Let's say, for example, I want to host on Heroku. I want to have both Angular or React and my Express backend. I need to use cores because it's going to come up with a cross-origin resource sharing error, so I need to add that in. Next, I'm going to add in Passport-Jwt, which is support for Passport. We're going to add it in as another layer in the Passport authentication system. And then after that, we also need Json Web Token because Json Web Token is the Jwt, so we have access to doing that as well. So those are the 3 modules we need to add. So let's add those in. And after we've added those modules, we also need to add support for code hinting. So let's add in the library. So yarn add @types cores @types passport-jwt and then @types Json Web Token, and then -- dev, okay, for dev dependency. So it adds those things in too. And now that we've added all that in, and you can see that we did that in our package.json, let's also change our package.json to say ICE13. We also, if we have a any other kind of README file or whatever, we want to change that too. But more or less, we're ready to go. So let's save that. And what I want to do here is let's clear the screen and then git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say added project files for in-class exercise 13. And git push. Okay, so that's what we did. So we have in-class exercise 13. However, what I'd like to do now is I also would like to Control-Shift-B. And Control-Shift-B, I want the watch task to kick off. The watch task is going to give me an error in my server again. We talked about this in the config app.ts. We found that there was an error, kind of with our code hinting for my passport serialized user. If I right-click on serialized user and go to definition, you can see what we did last day was we just temporarily changed this express user to any. That's what we did here. And if we save that, it fixes the problem on our app.ts. It silences the error, and it should be silenced because what we have here is the proper configuration. Okay, so that's this part. And what I want to do now is I want to follow the guide that I've put up for the stuff that I've talked about with you guys. So what we need to do is, if I go kind of up to the top here, I want to update my header component to show active links. How do I do that? Because that's kind of missing from your A4. Let's do that first. So that means inside of my views, inside of my components header, then how do I make these into active links? What do you think that would look like? What are your thoughts, guys? Anybody? I want to make these into active links. And what kind of EJS would I use in here to make that happen? Any idea? So what I could do, right, is I could go into each of the links, so in here like this, and I could inject it right in here. I could say, hey, I want to inject something. I want to inject active if this link matches the page. So I could say something like, hey, if my page object is equal to the href tag, let's make sure that it's single quotes, not double quotes. That is the condition. I can use a ternary operator to say that in case that's true, so anything after the question mark is true, then I want to inject active as a class. Otherwise, if it's false, then I want to inject nothing. That is your injection. And I can do that for home and all the other pages. Let's do that. So let's copy this part right here. And inside the link, I'm just going to do that for all of them, where this one happens to be products. And then this one happens to be services. And so on. And you can even put it inside your login page because you have a login page that'll work. And that's how it works. Okay, so let's test it out and see if that works. And we can go back to our page and make sure we test that. But we haven't started our node mon. Let's do that next. So I'm going to go and add another PowerShell and start node mon. It's going to connect for this week. We're not going to do a local database. We're going to connect to our remote database because it'll save us some steps. And we're not going to do anything locally anyway with the database. So we're just going to leave it as is. But what I want to do is I want to go to the, let's go to here. And let's go to our server. And if I go to login, you can see now that login lights up. It's an active link. And so is contact and about and services and products and home. Those are all active links now. So that kind of worked, right? That little change we made here, right, worked and added that active link in. What if I wanted also, this is something that's in your A4, your lab 4. What if I wanted you to also inject a link between the contact link and the logout link? How does that work? I want to take my login as a sample. and inject it in here. And let's just change the ID. So instead of login, let's call this contact list link. That's the ID. And we can keep this page. The page would be contact list. That's the page we're trying to compare with the link. And instead of the link itself that we're going to inject using some kind of sign in, let's just change the icon so that it's users, a bunch of users that are going to show up. And we can change the name of the link to contact list, so it looks like everything else. So that's how you inject a link. We're putting it inside of this area where there's a conditional statement. If the display name is true, which means we're logged in. If we're logged in, let's also generate a new link, right? We're also going to change the logout link to the login link to the logout link. But if we're not logged in, these two links disappear, and the only thing you see is the login link. Let's see if this works. So again, back to our page, you can see right now we're not logged in. Let's refresh. If, however, I do log in and I put in admin, then you can see that I'm also two links changed on the header. One of them is the login link turns into the logout link. And now I have a brand new link for contact list. And that contact list link stays everywhere. So if I click on there, I'm back to this contact list. Let's log out. All right, so that is how to change your header to inject active links, as well as add a new link between the contact page or the contact link and the logout link. Okay, let's put this up on GitHub. So again, going back to PowerShell, we're going to say git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say we added or updated the header to include active links, which is kind of what we did. Contact list is kind of an active link because also it becomes a new link if you're logged in. Okay, so that is this part. And what we did right now is we completed this part right here. I want to create separate routers now. Last time what we had, we kind of mostly did our model view controller, but we're still missing a couple of things. One is we're missing a controllers folder. We don't have a controllers folder. So let's add that into the server. So server, we're adding a brand new folder and we're calling it controllers. Now, what we want to do before we actually do the controllers, remember the controllers represent the logic for your site. We have all the logic embedded here inside of our index route. We also have this useless users route that I haven't taken out yet. Let's take out this route first so I can show you how you can remove a route. So first things first, we want to go into our config, our app.ts, and scroll to the top. On the top, you can see that there's an area that we have a app configuration for routing. We have this users route, but we don't need it anymore. We've never really used it. It was just there from the beginning when we used Express Generator. Let's get rid of it. So once we remove that route, right, it's going to cause an error. So this is around line 24, but somewhere around line 78 or so, right, you're going to see that this error, we're trying to use the route that we don't have anymore. So we have to remove it from here too. So those two things. So line around 77, 78, I've removed a reference to the users router. And at the top around, again, line 24, 25 area, and maybe yours is slightly different, I've removed the import statement as well. Now that I've removed that from the configuration, I can remove these files. I can say, I don't need user.ts, user.js, user.js here inside of the roots folder. So I can go here and just delete them. What I want instead is 3 more files. I want to separate my roots like this. I want an authentication root file. I also want a file for contact list roots. So let's add 2 more files in there. So I want to add a new file called auth.ts. So that's all my authentication roots are going to go in there. And I want to add another file, so a new file called contact list.ts. And that's going to be where my contact list routes are going to be inside here. So how do I separate them? Well, we have all the routes right now in my index.ts, right? So, and the top level routes up here, these ones, these are all your top level routes, right? That's all the stuff that you get, from when you go to your website for the first time. You have your navigation bar, you see all these routes here. So home, about, services, blah, blah, blah. Those are top level. And then you have an area down here, which are authentication routes. So here you might have some authentication routes. Right? And what we want to do is we want to remove these sections. There's also another section way down here, right, where we have some contact list routes here. So let's say this area here is where all the contact list routes are. Oh, wow. Bad, Tom. Okay, that's where the contact list routes. Now I've done this on purpose, these little separators, because I'm going to use them so that way we can kind of determine where one thing starts and another one stops. At the bottom, just to let you know, there's one little piece that we don't want to get rid of, which is this export default router. And so we want to be able to keep that piece. And so we're just going to put a little end down here, which is something we're not going to do. We're not going to go beyond this little point down here when it comes to deletion and copying and all that stuff. So this is going to stay. All right, so that's cool. So that's what we've done to our index. Let's move the stuff we don't want. So again, I want to copy everything right now. So Control A, Control C, copy the whole thing. And I want to start with my auth route. Let's start with that one. So in my auth route, I want to paste everything. Okay, so that's everything for my index route. Awesome. And what I want to do here is I want to go through and say, okay, well, I don't need all of this stuff. I don't need my top level routes in my auth route. I only need authentication routing, which is login, logout, registration. That's all I need. Let's get rid of all these top routes first. So all these top routes, goodbye. I'm going to go all the way till I see the next little thing right here. So this is where I want to go to where I see my authentication. Did I do authentication routes? Here it is. I went too far. And I want to delete it. So those are gone. So I don't care about those things anymore. And also what I want is I don't care about the other routes. So because I'm doing authentication, I need the user model. I need that, but I don't need the contact model. So the contact model is only for my contact pages. So I don't need that, right? And notice that there's a bunch of these errors now if I hop down there, because all of these need the contact model, but I'm not going to need these because I'm not going to do contact list routes. So let's remove all of this all the way down to the bottom, but not including this export default router. All right, so now I have only the routes in here that I need for authentication. These are only the routes I need for authentication. I've kept everything else, the authentication routes. The other ones I threw away. And notice there's some stuff that's grayed out. For example, AuthGuard. AuthGuard is not required for authentication. You're not logged in yet, so you don't need AuthGuard to protect the site. So therefore, you don't need this reference. So these are the references and the routes I need for authentication. All I've done is I've stripped all the stuff I don't need out of the index.ts file, and I've just left the rest in here. Let's go back to the index.ts file now and remove the authentication stuff, because I'm putting it in a separate spot. So again, moving up to where we have the authentication routes, let's remove all those. So starting from here on line approximately 46 of our index.ts, all the way down to where we see our contact list routes, let's just delete all that stuff. So now that we've deleted it, if I go all the way to the top, I can see there's things I don't need. Like for example, I don't need the user model here in my index.ts file. I don't need that anymore. So let's get rid of that. I also don't need passport because I'm not doing anything with authentication, right? In my index.ts, my main level routes, they have nothing to do with authentication. So I can save. Now I have other things in there for now, but I want to do one of these splits at a time. And I've just split off my authentication piece. So what I want to do now, after I've split off that route, is configure it in my configuration. So I'm going to go back to my app.ts, and I'm going to go all the way to the top where I have my router. And now let's make my auth router. So import auth router from ... /routes/auth. And that's going to make a reference to my authentication file that I just made, my authentication router. And what I want to do now is go down to right now around line 78 again, where I had that other route, and just put the new one in, app.use. And then I come to this decision mark. It says, hey, what route am I going to use here? If I use /, that means it's going to be top level. That's what I want it to do. That means in my main navigation, there's not another layer that I'm going to go through. Login and logout happen at the top. So therefore, it's my main routing. And I'm just going to put in auth router here. So that is the way we connect our auth router, right, after we have configured our Express server to run properly. Okay, so we do it here. We do our router configuration after we do our user serialization and our auth strategy. We do all that, our router configuration afterwards, down here. All right, excellent. Well, let's test it to see if it works before we put it up on GitHub. So again, I'm going to go back to our site, and I'm going to log in. So first refresh. If I can see this page, guys, I'm pretty good, actually. Because remember, one of the things that my router configuration does is display my login page, right? And if I can display my login page, and chances are everything else is still working. So that's good. So now that I've separated out my my router, which is my auth router, let's do a git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say created auth router, and then git push. So again, I'm doing this. I'm kind of separating things out for you guys, because what I want to try and do is show you how we want to separate our routes so that they're a little simpler to look at. Okay, let's go back to my index.ts. So now I have my top level routes, plus I have my contact list stuff. I want to copy everything again, Control A, Control C, go over to my contact list.ts, which is empty right now, and paste that in. So now what I want to do is kind of the same thing, but I want to remove all my top level routes again. So top level routes, goodbye. Don't need all this stuff. I'm going to go all the way till I get to, I went too far, till my contact list routes. So get rid of everything except for my contact list routes. Here we are. Cool. Well, this is not temporary anymore. This is going to be its new home. So we can take that line out. This is my contact list routes. And well, that's cool, right? I like them. That's pretty much where they are. We need models for them. We need a router because we're still routing. We need both user display name and auth guard, because that's what I need here. Some in auth guard here, user display name here. Those are two utility functions. But what about my index? My index now can also get rid of the opposite. I can kind of get rid of all of these contact list routes. So again, I'm going to scroll up to where it says contact list routes and just drop down to the bottom, not including the bottom router. I'm just going to get rid of everything. And now you can see that my top level routes only have home, about, services, products, contact, and so on. And you can see that there's more stuff grayed out. I have my contact model grayed out, well, because I don't need to do anything with the contact here anymore, right? That's going to be done in my contact list. So let's get rid of that. And we don't need auth guard because all of these are top level sites. None of them should be guarded. Let's get rid of this. Okay, so now you can see that my index router is a little bit simpler than it was before. My contact list router also only has contact list routes, right? Excellent. Let's go back and do the configuration change in my app.ts. Just like before, I'm going to go all the way to the top first. I'm going to go into where I import my routing. So I'm going to say import, and we're going to call this contact list router from ... /routes/contact list. And now we have a reference to my contact list module, contact list router module. Notice it's grayed out because we haven't used it, and we're going to use it down around line 78. So just jump down there. And around line 78 or so, 79, we're going to make use of it. App.use. And now again, we got to think about this thing. Is it a top level route? We could make it its own route. We could put something like contact list in here. And then use the contact list router. We could do that. But if we were to do that, that means all the routes are there's a prefix for all the routes, which is contact list. So all routes then are going to be something like /contact list / whatever that's going to be. It'll look like this actually, right? And maybe I don't want this to happen, because what about the contact list route itself? Contact list already, if I go to my contact list route, has contact list in it, which means for me to do that, I'd have to remove this part, because now it would be this is the main contact list. So it can be a little bit confusing. It also creates another layer or subdomain, and I don't feel like doing that here today. So I'm just going to leave this again back to /. All right, so all of these are top level routes. All I'm doing is separating the router out into different parts. So back to to our contact list, it looks as it did before, and I've connected all the stuff. I did all my configuration here and at the top of my app.ts file. Let's make sure everything is saved and go back out to our website and check it out. So again, refresh, and I want to put in my password, my username, and now that I got here, I'm pretty sure it works, because if I can go here and modify stuff, let's put that Peter A. Parker back, right? And it says, please enter full name, and it doesn't allow me to do that. Let's do that. Peter A. Parker, can I do that? Yes, it does. It allows it. That's pretty cool, right? And if I can do this, Peter A. Parker, then that's pretty good. Let's remove that and put it back to Peter Parker. So we can do an edit. And this is, by the way, this is up on the database online, which is pretty cool. All right, so great. So let's log out. So now we know that our routing is good, and we've just created our contact list router. Let's do that. Put it up on GitHub. We'll say created contact list router. And so we've got some separation, but we're not there yet. If you notice what it says in the PowerPoint, it says, okay, now that we've separated our routes, we want to create a controllers folder. And inside there, we want to separate our controllers from our routers. This is a lot of the big part that we want to do today. So let's go back and do that. So we have a controllers folder. The controllers folder really represents our logic, but our logic is embedded inside of our route. If I look at my index route, we have both the route part, which is this part, that's the route, and this part is the logic, right? We want to remove the logic and embed it somewhere else, so to keep the routing and the logic separate. Why? Separation of concerns, and it makes our the ability for us to maintain our each of our routes and the logic behind them, the controller logic, the controller code, separate and easier to maintain. Okay, so how does that work? Well, we need 3 more files in our controllers folder, 1 for each route. They should be named the same too. So new file, we'll have an index controller. We're also going to have a new file for our auth controller. We're also going to have another file for our contact list controller. Okay, so those are the 3 files that we have there with their counterparts. And again, what we want to do here is start off with something simple like the index. So every router, similar to what we did with our utility, right? In our utility function, our utility class, we have this little reference to express, where we can make our own middleware function. We need to do that again for the stuff that we're doing inside of our routers. Okay, so let's copy this, and let's go back into each of the controllers and populate. The first line should be, I want to have access to the request, response, and next objects. I want to do that for all of them. So index, contact list, and auth. And this way I can be able to do request, response, and next, and I get good code hinting from TypeScript. So that's kind of the first step when I'm making a controller. Second step, I want to save all first. I want to split screen, and I want to have on the right side my index. Here's my index controller. And on the left side, I want my index router. So it's easy to copy paste. So again, I'm going to go into my routes. I'm going to go into index. And you can see that here is where I want that one. And on the right is where I want my index router controller. So controller on the right, router on the left. Remember, the difference between routing and controlling is the controller is the logic. The router is just almost like an event handler. What am I going to do, right? It's either a get request or a post request, okay? I don't need router.anything over here. That's why I'm not going to include the router on this side, okay? So how does this work? So first, what I want to do is, now that I have a controller file, I want to start off with the export keyword. I want to export a function, and I want to call that function something that's normal. Like, for example, display homepage, right? That display homepage function, I'm just going to pull this a little bit wider so you can see it for now. The display homepage function is going to include a request, a response, and a next object, and it's going to return void. Okay? But the problem is TypeScript demands that these things are configured. So what we're going to do is we're going to say request is of type request, the response is of type response, and the next is of type next function. Now remember, we're creating our own little middleware functions, what we're doing with our controllers, right? So that is the stub for my display homepage, okay? Well, we have a bunch of things to display. So what we'll do is we'll create this, we'll use this as a pattern for the rest of them. So let's copy paste all these. So we'll say, fine, I want to be able to display my home page. By the way, these should be very familiar to you. I want to display my about page. I want to display my services page. I want to display my products page. And I want to display my contact page. So those are all the stubs. And the signature for all of them are the same because they're middleware functions. My own custom middleware functions is what I have here, okay? So what I want to do now is, and welcome for those people who just came in. I'm sure you had some other things that you were doing. I want to start grabbing when I'm separating my router from my controller, I want to grab the meat, the guts of my router in here, cut it, and put it inside of my controller, like so. But notice that now the guts of my code require something called user display name. That comes from the user display name function, which is in my index. I
could not find that on Apple Music.
Neither can I. And from my my utility folder. So I'm going to copy this part and include an import statement at the top of my controller that also includes user display name, because I need user display name because I'm going to use it here when with my controller. No problem. So that is that's where my my code is going to be, right? And well, the good thing is that my slash route and my home route are the exact same. Okay, how about display about page? I'm going to do the same thing. Grab this part here, so cut this part out and just push it in there, right? Do the same thing for the services page. Grab the meat from inside there and put it inside of here. And the same thing goes with my display products page. I'm going to grab the meat, the code from in here, right? Cut that out and put that in here, right? So I'm just kind of moving them over. And finally, I'm going to grab my contact page, grab that out and put it in here. So now all this stuff is the same as what this was over here. It's essentially, I've just created another layer of functions that I want to use. How do I link them to my routes? Well, first of all, I don't need this one in the home page. Let's get rid of that, right? Because that's the same as these two things are the same pretty much, right? So how do I do this? How do I do these two things? Well, what I want to do is I want to import like an instance of my controller, right? So the related controller. So import instance of controller. And the controller is going to be an import. I'm going to use curly braces to only specify those functions that I want. For example, I want the display homepage function. Let's say if I want to do the first one, and I want to get that from /controllers/index. So that's my index controller. So let's save this and save this. And display homepage, the way I use it in my routes is I just replace this part with display homepage. And notice that now that lights up. This is the same, so I can use the same function again. And by the way, there's another shortcut to doing this in one line. How about the about, service, products, and so on? Same thing. So I can replace this part, and I can start typing. And this is the beautiful thing about starting the import process. I can say, I want to display the about, and notice that before I finish, I have two options. One of them is this purple little cube-like object, and the other one is ABC. Choose the purple cube object. If you click on it or tab into it, then not only does it place it here, but it also includes it here in the import statement. Pretty slick, okay? So the same thing goes with the next part. So let's do the next one. So put that in there, and I'm going to say display services page, choose the purple one, and I'm good. And do the same thing with the next one, where I want to display the products page, choose the purple one, and I'm good. So it doesn't just do this part, but it also puts it up there. And finally, I'm going to do the next part, which is display the contact page, choose the purple option, and go there. And now I've completed my router, and I've separated my controller from my router. Now notice that there's something that's grayed out here. I have on line 4 a grayed out option for user display name. Why? I'm not using it here. It's being used in my controller logic, not my router. So we can get rid of it. And now my router looks like this. Let's test my router to make sure it works properly. So save, go back to here. Go back to here, and my display pages should work. If I press home, products, services, about, we're good to go. I can still see everything that I saw before. If I can do this, right, especially these two things like this, then I'm good to go. Let's put this up. So git add dot, git commit -m, and I'll say created index controller, because that's the first controller we made. Git push. Oh, I know what I did wrong. -m needs a space. And we'll do that again. There we go. All right, so that's my created index controller. Awesome. So now I want to do the same things for my other ones. Let's drop out of this one, open this up, and notice how awesome, how beautiful my little router looks. It's very simple, right? And so in a larger site, it allows me to see what all the pages are. And if I want to see the actual logic, I can right click on my display homepage, go to definition, and there it is. There's my little homepage. So pretty straightforward stuff. All right, let's do that again for my next one. So again, I want to do my auth this time. Let's split screen. So on my right, I'm going to have my auth controller. On my left, I want to have my auth router. Auth meaning authentication, right? So just like I did before, I want to make sure that I have all the stuff that I need to support what's happening here. I have a couple of import statements, and to be smart, I want to bring them in now. I don't want to wait and have a problem like I did last time. So copy these ones, go across to here, and now I've added my passport, my user model, and my user display name option for my authentication routes. Okay, I want to now create my, there's two areas really. I want display pages, right? And I want process pages, right? So those two functions. So display pages functions, and I want my process pages functions to go here, right? So let's start with my display pages functions first. Let's also route that last controller that I had. So I'm just going to quickly go over to my index controller, right? And I'm just going to grab one of the examples here, right? So one of these. I'm going to copy this one, and I'm going to go back to my my auth router for a second, just so we can see it. And I'm just going to copy paste, instead of display home page, that's not what I want to do. I want to display my login page. The reason why I did that little copy paste is because, well, all this stuff is the same, right? So we don't want to, kind of slog and type that in. The meat is not the same though, right? The code that we're going to put in is this code over here. So when I grab the login page stuff, cut it, that's how confident we have to be, and paste it in there. So that is the display login page, okay? Let's undo that change for a second. That's what I'm going to do, but I want to create these stubs. So copy this, paste. So that's going to be the display register page, right? And then we're going to do the same thing for the process pages. I want to grab both of those, copy, go back to the process pages, and I'm going to say process login page and process register page. And finally, we need one more process. We're going to process the logout page. We don't have really a logout page, but we're going to call it that. Process logout page, just to be consistent. So those are our stubs. Now I can go ahead and do that cut paste. So I can go cut and paste in there. All right, that's going to be our display login page. This one is going to be our process login page, and I'm just going to grab all of this stuff all the way down to about here. I'm going to cut this part out so you can see that there's nothing in there anymore. And in our process login page, I'm going to paste it in, okay? And same thing for our register page. We're going to cut it out of here for the display part, cut. And I'm going to go back up to the display register page and paste. Down in here where there's the process register request, I'm going to grab the stuff in the middle, and I'm going to cut it out, and I'm going to put it inside of my process register page over here. And finally, I'm going to grab the logout information and go down to the bottom and type, kind of paste in that code down there. There could be some additional formatting you may want to do. I'm not going to do that here just to save time, but you could do that to format this thing to make it look nice. Save. On the left now, we want to notice that all of these things here, passport, bottles, and blah, 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 none of this stuff counts anymore. We don't care about this stuff. All we care about is routing. And the way we can fix this is we want to import our controller instance, right? Which is, again, import curly braces. Let's say we want to display the login page, let's say that one, from where? From / controllers / auth. And that will give us the display login page. How do I replace this? Just like last time. Just replace this part here with display login page. Okay? Okay, cool. Now how about process login page? Same thing. So we go in, type in process login page, choose the purple option, which automatically puts it in over here too, and we've got most of it done. And now the next one is the display register page. Display register page, we can do that, and again, it's populating right in there. And finally, the process register page. Process register page, we can see that that populates it right in there. And the last part is the process logout page. Process logout page, which is right there. And now we can see that we have, on the left-hand side, we have very simple routing. And on the right-hand side, we have all the controller. This is the logic behind the routing. So nice and easy. We've also cleaned this up, and we only have up here the things that we need. Great. Let's test it. Save. Save. Let's go back out to the page, and let's test to see if that works. We just did our our authentication controller. So if I go to login, there it is. If I can see login, chances are we're good to go, right? So I want to type in admin and log in. So now you can see that the login pages or the authentication logic is still there. Log out. Excellent. So now we can go to the next step, which is git add dot git commit -m, and we're going to say created auth controller, and then git push. Right? Last controller. We did everything perfectly so far. All we are left to do with is the contact list controller, which is slightly different. Let's talk about the differences. So contact list controller, again, you can see is empty. I want to grab an example of this from my auth.ts. Auth.ts has a nice export function I'm going to use for the display login page. I'm going to grab this piece, copy it, go into my contact list.ts, and down in here, I'm going to paste that first stub of a function. I don't need the stuff inside, and I can even change the name to what it should be, which is display contact list page, right? That's what it should be. Display contact list page, right? Okay, so that's the first thing. I want to separate the pages again into display page functions and some other functions that are for process page functions. So display page functions and process page functions. You can also say process request, but it's fine. So that is what I did. I want to split screen, just like I did before, where my controller is on the right and my router is on the left. Let's bring my router in. Here it is. And to simplify things, I want to grab the top part of I need a contact model because I'm going to do stuff with the contact list over here. And I need both the user display name and the auth guard. So let's bring all those things as imports over here before we do anything else. So those things have to be up here. Cool. Just like we did before, I want to stub out all these different pages, right? So again, I want to copy paste to create my stubs. So the next one is display, instead of contact list page, it's going to be the add page because we're going to display the add page. We're also going to display the edit page, right? So that is another page we're going to display. Okay, so those are the three displays we're going to do. And then we're going to process the add page. So process, add page. That was weird. Process the add page. And we're also going to process the edit page. And finally, we're also going to process the delete page, although there's no delete page. We're just going to call it the same thing. Process delete page. Okay. So now we have all of our stubs, both on the display side and the process side. Let's start filling them in by cut and pasting. So again, we're going to go back to the contact list page, grab everything here, cut it, and inject it in there. And we're going to go into the display add page. We're going to cut it and paste it in there. And we're going to skip down to where the edit page is for the display edit page. And we're going to cut it, the data inside, cut it, and we're going to paste it in there. So now we have all of our display pages done. Okay, we're going to come back to see how they're used in a second. They're different. And on the right, we're also going to put in some process functions. We want to process the add request page. So we're going to go down here, grab the process code, and put it inside the process add page function. And we're going to grab the edit request stuff, and we're going to dump it inside of the process edit page function. And finally, we're going to grab all of the delete stuff and put it inside the delete code inside of the process delete page function. So now that we have all of our the controller already done, because all we did was copy paste in the exact same way, then on the left hand side we have to do a couple things. One, we don't need user display name anymore. We see that that's grayed out, and we wouldn't need that because that is going to happen on the controller side. However, we do need auth guard here. because the auth guard function is going to prevent us from moving to or show the content if we're not logged in. We don't need the contact model here in our controller because we're going to do all that stuff with the contact model in the in the router. We need it in the controller. At the same time, we don't need auth guard as a utility function in the controller because we're doing all the auth guard redirecting in the router. Okay. There we go. So that is what your headers should look like on both sides so far. And we also, of course, need to import an instance of the controller, which looks like import curly braces. And we're going to say display the contact list page from /controllers/contact list. And you're going to be like, this process, man, it's like so much copy pasting. Aren't we just adding more files? Yep, we're adding more files. We're actually abstracting a little bit away. But why? Because of separation of concerns. Now, when we start doing this kind of stuff, I can easily test my functions separated from my routes. Routes and functions are different. How do I incorporate this? Now here, there's an extra piece here that we didn't have before, which is the auth guard piece. That's a middleware function. Well, just like it says, all we need to do is leave that in place and change this to display contact list page. So now we have three parts: the route, middleware for auth guard, and our middleware for our controller. All right, that's what's happening there. Cool. So that's what we're going to do for all of them. So we're going to do the same thing here. This is the display add page. Pick the purple option. This is the process add page. And this is the display edit page. And this is the process edit page. Notice I'm keeping the auth guard stuff alone, leaving it alone. And finally, the process delete page. Okay, so I've done all of them. And that's what our contact list router looks like. This is what my contact list controller looks like. Basically, all we've done is we've ripped the guts out of the router and put it into a separate file. Pretty much what we did, right? But we also simplified some of the ways. It's like, look how easy and beautiful our routes look now. They're very easy to look at. We can also identify duplications, things that we can improve, right? As an example, notice that this, and this is the same, right? But these and this is different. We can simplify these routes, and maybe what we'll do is next week I'll show you how to do that. Okay, and whereas a lot of this is different, a lot of this code we worked on last week is still good to go, or 2 weeks ago is still good to go here, and it's going to work the exact same way. So let's test that assumption to make sure it's true. So save all, go back out to the page, and refresh, and let's log in. And there we go. You can see that we have our information. That's the contact list information. If I click edit, you can see that information there. If I click add, it takes me to this page. All those things are good. Pretty confident that we can do everything that we could have done before. And now we have a separation of concerns. We have the, like we said before, we have our controller and our router separated, which is what we wanted. That was our goal, one of our goals for today. Let's close some of these, editors down for a second and just go up and see the stuff we haven't had a chance to do. I'm just going to go back in here and just do a git add dot git commit -m, and I'll say created contact list controller and git push. One thing you can always do once you've done this is it's a great way of taking a look at your stuff. You can do a git status to tell you if everything is okay and if there's something that's missing. Notice it says that our server has some configuration files that have been changed, right? But we can actually look and see where these files have been changed, things that have been missed or whatever. You can see that ICE 12, or whatever, they had some changes and everything else. And these changes weren't uploaded to the server. That's probably because when I changed my host name from localhost to MongoDB Atlas, I didn't push this up last week. And that's okay. Let's do that now. So the way to do that is to go up one step. And I'm going to do git add dot git commit -m, and I'll say updated configuration for ICE 12. And that should free up some of these issues, right? And I've been noticing it, but I've been ignoring it until now. All right, other things to note so git status provides you a status. If we did git status again, you can see that we're all good to go. Git log also is really cool because we can track all of the changes that we've made from one commit to the next, and you can compare the first few characters of the commit with the GitHub repository online. Okay, excellent. So now that we've done that, press Q to get out of that. We've done all of this until about right here. Now we're ready to configure Jwt for next week. All right, so how do we do that? So first, let's go into our server, into our config, into our app.ts, and import those areas, the things that we need, and the spots that we need them, right? So remember that we added in cores, we added in passport JWT, we added a bunch of other stuff in here. And we want to create a little area here for us to include all those things that we just added in. So up on the top here, just after our local strategy and before our user model and local strategy, let's put on our imports. We'll say modules to support JWT. What do we need there? We need to import cores from cores. We also need to import passport JWT from passport dash JWT. Okay, so that's the thing we're going to use. And now that we have these things, now that we have those things, at the bottom, we're going to also include some, let's define Jwt aliases. And what are they? We're going to say let Jwt Strategy, again, we use aliases to shorten our code, is passport jwt.strategy. And let's also say that extract JWT is going to be equal to passport jwt.extract JWT. So those are the things, those are our little aliases we're going to use. And that's the first piece. The next piece is going to be way down on the bottom, underneath the app use. Before the session, we're going to app use our cores. So we're going to set up cores, and we're going to do that by app.use cores. Again, cores stands for cross-origin resource sharing. We want to make that available so we can have a server and the front end and the back end on the same box if we wanted to. That's why I want to do that. And just underneath where we have our serialized deserialized user and before our routing, we're going to start putting some information for our JWT. I want to start thinking about Jwt options. What are they? This one you have to type in exactly how it's shown here. So Jwt, we're going to say that, let Jwt options equals to Jwt from request. That's going to equal to extract Jwt dot from auth header as bearer token. Woo! That is the option we want. And that also has to be a instantiated. And then we also have to say the secret or key is dbconfig. We'll use a dbconfig.sessionSecret. Right, that's what it's going to be there. So those are the two pieces we need for the authentication. that we need for the Jwt options. Next, we also want to, define our Jwt strategy. So we can say that let strategy then equal to our new Jwt strategy, and that is going to take in Jwt options followed by a function that's going to have a Jwt payload. Payload is going to be our user information, and a done function to complete this promise. We're going to use promises here, which is the most popular way of doing it. And we're going to say, hey user, we want you to find by ID the Jwt payload dot ID, right? And if we're good, if you found everything that's good, then for good, we want to, let's use the fat arrow function for this one. We want you to return done, the done function. And the done function has two options, an error, a user, and some any, actually 3 options. For the error, there's no error in this case. We're good to go. For the user, let's pass in the user information that we just got. So that is the first thing. If everything goes well, if we found the user by ID, then return a done function, which a done function is almost like the next function, that carries along the user information. However, what if there's an error? We can use a catch, right? And we can have the error actually as a return. And we can say return done, but this time, instead of returning null, we'll return the error. And for the user, we'll return false. So no user. And that is our promise. So we're using the strategy to instantiate a new strategy. When we instantiate the new strategy, Jwt strategy, we actually find the user that's inside the payload we defined, right? We found them by ID. If we found the user, then we'll return a valid user object. Otherwise, we return an error. Okay? And then finally, for our configuration, we want to passport.use strategy. Okay, so that's how it looks. And let's put this up on GitHub. So again, on GitHub, we're going to say git commit -m. We'll say configured Jwt, right? Git push. Now you won't see a problem here, but it's always worthwhile going to check to see if there's any issues with logging in and logging out. At this point, there shouldn't be any problems because nothing has changed. We haven't changed any way that we log in or log out. I just want to make sure always the functionality remains the same. Now, let's actually implement Jwt inside of our auth controller. So again, going back to our controllers, I'd like to put it inside of here. But my problem when it comes to processing the login request is we need to generate a Jwt token. And we may need to generate the Jwt token in a couple of different places in our code, right? So instead of doing it down there, I want to actually first go to our index.ts in the util folder and create a new utility function. This utility function is something that I'm going to use that I can generate a token. And the way it's going to look is like this. I want to export a function called generate token. The generate token function is going to have a user object, which is going to be of type user document. Now we defined user document inside of the user model. Remember, if I go to the model and if I go to user.ts, there is a user document that we defined right here in the global space, right? So what I want to do in the user document or with this user document is use it for Jwt. Going back to my util index.ts, you can see here I've got my generate token. So how is this going to work? I'm going to create a payload. Remember we talked about that JWTs have 3 components, a header, a payload, and a signature. we're going to sign the payload or the token right here. So the way it's going to work is my payload is going to be my ID, which is going to include my ID, which is my user._ID. It's also going to have a display name, which is user.displayname. We're also going to have an email address, which is user.emailaddress. And finally, we're going to have a username, lowercase u, which is user.username, lowercase u. So that's our payload. That's going to be the information for the user, right? And then next, we're going to have a const Jwt options again, some more options. And in this case, the only option we care about is when does this token expire? It expires in this many milliseconds. Time in milliseconds, which equals to about 1 week. Okay? And then finally, once we've got the options in the payload, then we want to return Jwt. We're going to say, hey, Jwt. Well, I can't do Jwt yet because we haven't supported Jwt in our utility function. Let's do that. So to support that, we want to enable Jwt here. So we'll say enable Jwt. The way that works is we can say import Jwt from Json Web Token. And then what we want to do next is we want to say import star from, as db config from /config/db, because we want to use the same session secret that we've been using the entire time. Going back down here now, we can say, hey, Jwt, I want to return jwt.sign. Here's my signing. I'm signing the token. And my signature needs a bunch of different things. It needs a payload, which is either a string, an object, or a buffer. In this case, it's an object, right? So here's my payload. Then it needs a secret or private key, right? Which is of type jwt.secret. We're going to use dbconfig.sessionSecret. And then it needs signing options. And we're going to suggest that our Jwt signing options, we're going to have the token last for about a week. Now, we don't have to make it last like that. We can make it last for a day or an hour or however long you want it for. So we're going to say Jwt options. Okay, and that's really it. That's going to be the thing we sign. So sign, what it does is it returns a string. That's what it does, a string. So that's what it's returning when we sign in. So signing actually signs the token. We're going to generate a token based on Jwt and return it as something we can use later on. Again, remember that our whole point of this whole thing is next week when we have a client side or server side component, which is going to be the backend server. And then we're going to have a client side view, which is going to be generated by the front end architecture, whatever that is, or if it's going to be Angular or React or Vue or whatever we choose to do next week, right? And it's going to use the Jwt, to sign in. The back end is going to be used as an API, and the front end is going to be the view. Okay. So that is our little function, that generate token function. Okay, let's put that in as something that we're going to add in. So we're going to say git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say created generate token function, because we want to have that available to us, git push. And we want to have it in one place. We don't want to have it sitting inside one area. Why? Because what if I want to generate this token multiple times? What if I want to return a token? That might be something else I want to put in here, right? All right, next, now that we have our generate token object, then that's good. Then inside of our auth.ts, which is in our controllers folder, inside of our login function, this is the next place we're going to change stuff. And I'm going to talk about this so that you know what it's going to look like next week. So next week we're going to convert our Express backend to a an API. And it's going to, instead of returning actual pages, we're going to return JSON objects. So where we really need to make the changes here in this request login area, right? And in the request login area, we have, if there's an error, then there's a console error. Otherwise, we're good. We've logged in, right? And we're going to go to the contact list. Okay, that's what would happen is if we're using Express as both a front end and a back end. But what if next week we need to use Express only as a back end? Then what we want to do is we want to create something called an Auth Token, and that Auth Token is going to be generated by using the Jwt Token method. And notice that Jwt Token came up now because inside of our up here inside of our code, Jwt Token is part of my utility. Let's add that in. So I can say Jwt Token, right? And Jwt Token is something that is now a function that I'm getting from my util index, right? My utility file, right? So there's Jwt Token. All right, so I logged in. I'm generating a token. We can't really use it right now because we're not there, but for now, let's print that out. Let's do a console log and look at that auth token that is generated when we log in for the first time. By the way, if we had a front end, right, like Angular or React or Vue, okay, then what it would look like instead of this part, it would be like this: return res response.json. So we're returning a JSON object, and we would have a success, which would be true. We would also return a message, which would be something like user logged in successfully. Some kind of message we would return as well, so that we would know. And then finally, a user. We would pass in or pass out the user object, whatever the user is, and then a token. And the token would be the auth token. That's where we would use it right here, okay? Now, we don't have a front end right now, but that's the kind of code that we would use. Okay? For now, let's see if we can generate that token, which is what the purpose of today is. So save, and going back out to here, let's log in. And when we do so, we don't see it here, but if we go to our code and I go back out to Node, then you can see that this is indeed the token. And that's all the information encoded that we asked it to create. This is our header right here. And the next part, which is way over here all the way to here, that is our payload. And then this part here is our signature. Okay, that's how the tokens work. They create a token, and we store this typically in something called, in local storage, and we'll do that on the front end. Okay, now we don't want to expose that token right here, so we can not do that. That was just for testing. But now what we've done, which is great, is we have git add dot git commit -m. What we've done is we've generated a JWT git push. So that's where I wanted to take us today. I want to generate a JWT. Once we have that, you can consume that on the front end, and we can use that as create a signed token that we can pass around between our front end and our back end, which we need for next week. Okay, so that's what we did, and for the most part, we've completed our lab requirements. We've gotten to about right here. The next part of the lab, which I'm going to leave to you, I'm going to put up the lab report later on today. The only part that's missing from the things that I've asked you to do here is putting it up live on Heroku live site. Like put it up on Heroku. I'm not going to do that with you right now because you've already know how to do that. That'll be a you to do thing, and it'll be on your lab report. But there is one last thing as a bonus that I haven't asked you to do that's not here, that I also recommend, but not going to push you to do it. Okay, and I'll talk about this next week. If I go to my configuration, my app.ts, at the bottom, what I'm seeing is a little error handler. And this little error handler is pumping out the error, and what it's using is a little res render. Now we've seen res render before. What this is doing is it's actually going and rendering the error template. Okay, where is that error template? Well, we never touched it, but it's right here. Under views error.ejs, there's a little template that doesn't do anything actually. It actually does bad things for us. It puts out the message, it tells us the status, and it shows us the error stack. We don't want to show the error stack to everybody. That is a pretty ugly thing to show people. So instead of showing people the error stack, we can do something different. And let's talk about what we can do. So again, not really part of your requirements because next week we're going to change all this again, but let me talk about what I would do. So first of all, let's go back to my app.ts. At the bottom here, I have two things, an error message and some kind of error. I want to create some objects to do that with. So here, what I want to do at the bottom is I want to treat this template as an actual template, where I have some kind of object that I'm going to pass to the template as well, just like we normally would with a router. We're going to have a message object. That message object is going to be the message, which is going to be my error.message. All right. We also are going to have an error object that we're going to use, and we're going to have the error that we're going to pass in there. We also need some stuff that we had in the other template. For example, a title, just in case we need it, as well as a page, just in case we need that, and a display name, just in case we need that. So we're going to have all those pieces, just like we would need normally. And those pieces are going to be passed to the error template. The error template now really looks pretty boring. Let's make it more exciting and make it look nicer. What we're going to do is we're going to go into the index.ejs template and grab everything, Control A, Control C, go back into my error template, which has only these 3 lines, and pump that in there. And notice that message, error status, and error stack are here. We can delete them. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with those in a second. So I don't need all of this, right? Because, well, I don't need to inject new content. It's just going to be the error that I want to show for now, right? So how this is going to look is like this. In the title, I want to have the word error followed by, I want to inject the message error that I want to have before. So some kind of error.status is where it's going to go here, okay? And then what I want to do is I want to have the message appear here. So there's going to be 2 injections, one for the error status, for example, 404, and then the message not found as an example, okay? I want to do this exact same thing in an H1 tag inside of my content area. So I'm going to say H1. Inside there, I want to do the same thing. I want to show the same message that's there here. I don't need to do all the scripting stuff that we did before. In fact, a lot of the scripting stuff now is obsolete because we do a lot of this on the back end. So let's get rid of all this. And we don't need to do scripts app.js at all. Please get rid of that. So now your template for your error or your error.ejs looks like this. It looks similar to what we did with our index.ejs, but no injection of content, just the error code. And we're also not showing the error stack, which is, well, a security problem. So let's save that and see what it looks like now online. So if I go back to logout, and let's suppose I'm hunting for a page that doesn't exist, and press enter, now we get this, error 404, not found. And notice at the top here it says the same thing, error 404, not found. But we don't get any of that terrible error information that's in here. And so this is kind of a beginning of a custom 404 page. You can certainly add additional things in here, check to see what kind of error you're getting, and then do something like oops, you know, and all that kind of stuff. You can also redirect the content so it goes into the content area where we have our 404. We have this like content area we can inject if you want to do that as well. There's lots of stuff that you can do to make this more interactive. I'm going to keep it just this simple for now. Okay, so that is kind of the end of today. I just wanted to add that extra in there. It's not required for your in-class exercise 13, but it's a nice to have. Okay, let's save this and put this up on GitHub. So git add dot git commit -m, and it's we created error EJS template. And that's it for today, guys. Any questions for the couple of guys that are stuck around for this afternoon before we go for the day? Let's review the stuff that's due before we go. Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
everything's okay. I just need some notes from the previous ISIS, like other than that.
oh, okay.
I think I'm going to be able to resolve that, and I'm going to send that.
Awesome. That's great. So a couple things to note. Now at this point, after today, you should have everything you need for Lab 4. Lab 4, you shouldn't have any piece of technology or something we haven't talked about to help you, to support you to build Lab 4 at this point. Okay. So please, there's nothing for you to wait for anymore. You could submit it anytime between now and next week. The earlier you submit, the better. And why? Because if there's any changes you need to make, you can always do another change. You don't want to wait to the last minute to get this done. It's worth 15% of your final grade. You might as well get it done as soon as you can. All you need is your content pages. A lot of you said you're going to take some of that from your Lab 1. That's fine. You can totally do that. And you can use the same content, or a lot of the same content anyway, for your Lab 4, right? But your Lab 4 backend, now we're full circle again, right? And we've kind of come from Lab 1 to Lab 4. We've used a lot of the same stuff over and over again. But at this point now, you should all be much more confident with using JavaScript on the front end and JavaScript on the back end. All right, so until next week, again, there's no class on Friday because of Good Friday, but until next week, good luck, and I will post the lab report later today. Okay, guys, thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next week on Wednesday. Thanks a lot. And I'll stop recording it.